countries like Pakistan, which are reeling from the consequences of emissions it did not create. But even in our society, this burden is not shared equally. Climate change affects communities, women, children, the ones who are the least protected, the ones who are most vulnerable. And it falls the hardest on those who are living on the edge. Climate change today is reshaping economies, public health, education, productivity, livelihoods, and social system protections across the world. It is no longer a standalone environmental issue. It is a humanitarian crisis. And more importantly, it is an equity crisis. For millions of Pakistanis across the country, climate change is no longer an abstract future risk. It is a lived reality. We saw this during the floods of 2022, where over 33 million people across Pakistan were affected, and nearly half of them were women and children. We saw this again in 2025. Lives were lost, homes were washed away, livelihoods were ruined, and schools were destroyed. But what remained lingering on much after the flood waters receded was inequality. Today, in Pakistan, over 112 million children are at potential risk of climate-related events. And globally, the figures are even more stark. 242 million children had their education disrupted just in one single year. In Pakistan, we're standing here at Breathe Pakistan, the air pollution alone causes 1 in 8 child deaths. As I stand here today before you, my 7-year-old son is braving a heat wave in Karachi, which has now become a norm rather than an exception. The World Bank says that if we do not take urgent action, climate change can potentially reduce Pakistan's GDP by up to 20% by 2050. Now, these are figures that should be alarming all of us. Now, this is precisely why we talk about equity, because equity can no longer be a peripheral discussion in climate policy making. It has to be central to it. Because those who are contributing the least to the crisis are the ones who are bearing the heaviest burdens. No doubt, Pakistan has taken important steps in recent years. We've had climate commitments, we've had adaptation frameworks, we've had discussions on global platforms, and we've also invested in infrastructure. But we need to be honest. These efforts matter. But if you look at it more candidly, there are gaps which remain. At the local level, the implementation is still uneven. And climate resilience is still not fully integrated in critical sectors like health, like education, like housing, and social safety networks. And we also still lack granular and disaggregated data of lived realities of the most vulnerable populations. Now, when I talk about women and children and the vulnerable communities, these are not just the victims of climate change. They're also, in many cases, the first ones, the front-line responders. They're adapting, they are coping with remarkable resilience on ground in such adversities. And yet, they are the ones who are the least represented at the decision-making tables. And that is why I say that the conversation now needs to shift from just declaration to implementation. Global promises will only be meaningful if their outcomes reach the most vulnerable and the ones who need it the most. And if they don't reach the ones who need it the most, and they are left behind once again, that is unfortunately the heart of climate injustice. Now, as chair, I look forward to a very informed discussion by the speakers who are going to come. Of course, Shehzad is here, and I see my dear friend Uzma sitting there. And I feel that the conversation needs to be honest. It needs to be solution driven. It needs to be evidence based, and it needs to be grounded in lived reality. I see Famida sitting over there, and Famida, I think we need to ask and we need to answer certain important questions, difficult questions, but important questions. How do we ensure that climate finance reaches those who need it the most? How do we protect our children's education, their health, and their future from climate shocks? How do we ensure and how do we place women and the vulnerable communities at the center of climate policy planning? And how do we turn national commitments into local resilience? Because ultimately, the decisions that we take today determine who is going to be protected and who will be left out. And in this process, we must ensure that no one is left out. So my question before all of you is very, very clear. Will climate action deepen the existing inequalities? Or will we turn this into an opportunity to build a just, a resilient, and equitable future for our children? Because equity is something we do not add on later. It is the single most important factor that determines whether the policy succeeds or fails. So I look forward to a very informed discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for those words. Can I please have Mr. Shahzad Roy come and address the audience?
Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. My father used to tell me that there used to be beautiful marine life in Karachi, and now we just don't see any. It's very sad. And it's an undeniable fact that we have been dumping around 400 to 600 millions of gallons of untreated sewage and waste into our sea, into our rivers. And it's happening sare provinces mein ye ho raha hai. And I'm not saying that industries are not regulating themselves. They have treatment plants, but I think the government has to regulate our industries, and they have to regulate and they have to fix the treatment plants. And it's a no-brainer. You know, we can talk about climate change the whole month or today or next week, but I genuinely feel that why can't we stop this? Hundreds of millions of gallons we are dumping into our rivers and seas. So I think it's very important that state and industry, they both have to realize this, that they have to stop this. And I think it's a fixable problem, और ये कल सुबह हो सकता है. क्यों नहीं हो रहा? I wish कि अगर चारों provinces के heads यहाँ बैठे होते तो हम उनसे पूछ सकते. Industries के head होते तो उनसे पूछते. बल्कि SCCP के chairman मुझे नज़र आए थे तो मैंने सोचा मैं इनसे पूछूं कि आप यही regulate कर दें industries को कि वो अपने treatment plants रखें. But anyway, I genuinely believe that climate change is a real issue. बहुत ही scary है. But I see Dr. Zeba Sattar over here. I just did a song for population management. It's called Waqfa, Spacing Between Children. And it's for Population Council and MKRF. And there's a debate going on. And I'm very happy that it triggered a debate, but I was just speaking to Dr. Saba, and we were discussing that unless we don't have call to action, obviously state and other organizations, they have to provide or strengthen BHQs and unko contraceptives dena, because 30% of, I think, जिनकी शादियाँ होती, they want to ये family planning करना चाहते हैं वो, लेकिन वो नहीं कर पाते because शायद उनके पास guidance नहीं है, BHQs equipped नहीं है, contraceptives की availability नहीं है. So without call to action, state की regulations के बगैर कोई भी चीज़ isolation में करना बहुत मुश्किल है. We turn around government schools in Pakistan and we try to change policies across. So I think in isolation, if we just teach our children, because we also influence our curriculum, our syllabus, And Sharmila is here, so मैं इनको मुबारकबाद देना चाहूँगा that Sindh was the first province in Pakistan जिन्होंने बच्चों को sexual abuse से बचाने के लिए curriculum implement किया था. I think they deserve a big round of applause. And unfortunately अभी वो पूरे पाकिस्तान में कहीं पर भी implement नहीं हुआ, but I think Punjab is really willing to do it. I don't know about KPK and Balochistan. So it was the first province जहाँ पर safe touch, unsafe touch की बातचीत शुरू हुई थी. But it's really important to understand that when we implemented this curriculum with Ahang in our government schools and private schools, and when children started speaking about it, कि safe touch होता क्या है, unsafe touch होता क्या है, आप इसको report कैसे करते हैं, when children started reporting about this, then we realized that हमारा child protection unit है, not just in Sindh but हर जगह, उसके अंदर social welfare department नहीं है, उसमें police नहीं है, उसमें health नहीं है, they don't have good psychologists, child psychologists, police, women police who are trained to deal such issues. I think बच्चे अगर जब बताना शुरू करते हैं तो उसको fix कैसे किया जाएगा? Again यहाँ पे फिर दोबारा state आ जाती है. So हम बच्चों को जितना भी सिखा दें not to litter, climate change की awareness के बारे में, you know, when you talk to an underprivileged family and tell them, and if you teach a child कि आप straw use नहीं करते, आपने litter नहीं करना, because they earn their bread every day, they are the earning member of their families. उनको नहीं समझ आता climate change. So it's extremely important that yes, we need multiple interventions. We need to teach our children कि climate change है क्या, हम कैसे prevent कर सकते हैं, कैसे contribute कर सकते हैं. But it's extremely important कि state को regulate करना पड़ेगा. So आखिर में बस I would like to request all our provinces and all our industries to please stop dumping untreated sewage and untreated waste into our seas and rivers. Thank you.
Thank you to both panelists. Can I please request you to have a quick picture before you go off? And a huge round of applause for two people who are really making a positive change in our country. Thank you both. Next up, we have a panel discussion moderated by Ms. Pernil Ironside from UNICEF Pakistan. May I request Pernil to please come on stage? And I'd also request the panelists to come on stage now. Ms. Uzma Yusuf, Country Director Pakistan, Cambridge Global Climate and the Global Climate Change Ambassador for Cambridge and the SDG Ambassador. Ms. Ellen Tom, Deputy Representative, WHO Pakistan. Ms. Fatma Faraz, who's a youth advocate. Ms. Fahmida Khan, the Deputy Country Representative for UN Women Pakistan. And Dr. Zeba Sattar, Country Director, Pakistan Population Council. Ladies, may I request you all to please join us? It's also the first completely female-dominated panel, so I'm sure it'll be more exciting than the ones we've had before us. So I'll hand over to Pernil to take over. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for that introduction, and what a pleasure to also follow this the two preeminent speakers who just came before us. I'm Pernilla Ironside. I'm UNICEF's country representative, and I'm truly pleased to join you here today for Dawn's second climate change conference, moderating this important panel on unequal burdens, shared futures, reframing the climate action through equity. Equity being the key word here this afternoon. So this conversation is both timely, but it's also essential, particularly for Pakistan's children and its young people. As you will have no doubt heard, Pakistan contributes less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet it remains one of the most vulnerable countries affected by climate change. The floods in 2022 impacted over 33 million people, mostly through climate change, and at least half of them were children. That single climate event damaged or destroyed more than 27,000 schools. It contaminated countless water sources, disrupting education, nutrition, healthcare, protection systems on such a massive scale. And many of those communities are still recovering today. As UNICEF, we see the impacts of climate change every day. And we see how these statistics are translated into lived realities. This is particularly the case in flood-affected areas. Families tell us how they have had to rebuild their homes. Some haven't completed that rebuilding. Oftentimes, they've had to rebuild multiple times, only to be displaced again. We're meeting girls who have not returned to school after displacement because the care responsibilities have increased, their safety concerns have increased or deepened, the household resources are even more constrained or have simply run out. And for these children, climate change is not a future scenario, it's something that they are experiencing right now in their childhood. So this is why climate change in Pakistan right now is so vital. And I'm particularly pleased that we have the space to have this discussion at the moment. It's not only an environmental issue, but one of deep equity and justice. And we're going to hear, we have an incredible panel. Isn't this a wonderful lineup of leading ladies and female women here? It's about time we have a full female panel. I'm going to introduce each one of them very shortly. The impacts are also very clearly cross-sectoral. We've heard a moment ago also from Madam Sharmila. The evidence is telling us that the climate shocks are increasing not only malnutrition, they're straining health systems, which Ellen is going to speak about. They're disrupting learning, which we're also going to hear about from Fatima, and damaging the WASH infrastructure, heightening protection risks, especially for girls and adolescent girls in particular. So we know that climate stress is compounding the existing vulnerabilities that are already there. It's also reversing hard-won development gains. So it's not just about a moral imperative, but really a practical pathway to also ensuring that climate action is more effective and more impactful. So the central question for this panel that we are going to tackle is, how do we embed equity at the heart of climate policy, financing, and implementation so that climate action in Pakistan truly leaves no one behind? I'm going to ask each of our eminent panelists one question. Some have a series of kind of packed questions in there to have their reflections. We're a tight session, so we're going to keep it crisp. And if there's time, we'll have some engagement as well with the audience. So I have the pleasure of starting with you, Uzma. Uzma Yusuf is the country director and global climate action, climate change ambassador for Cambridge and an SDG ambassador. And Uzma, the question for you that I'd appreciate if you can elucidate on is, how can Pakistan's education system be restructured to integrate climate literacy in a way that reduces inequities between public and private schooling systems?
Thank you, Pernell, and pleasure to be a part of this discussion, and really honored and to follow Sharmila and Shehzad is not easy. They've said most of the most important things. I think as far as education is concerned, we also need to understand that education does not work in isolation. It is a reflection of how our society works. So the inequality in our society is huge, as we all know. A child in Niger has the same kind of expectancy of life chances as a child in Balochistan. However, in the most affluent households in Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi, our children might be living up to a potential of anywhere else in the developed world. But what does that mean for us as a society? That means that we are fragmented, that everybody does not have the same life chances and choices, and that the future looks very different for us. So, as far as restructuring is concerned, I'm not entirely sure if that is something that we should think about. I think sometimes, a common enemy is required to unite people. Even though we've had this fragmented education, 3 different tiers, high-end private schools, medium, state, good, state, and, all state schools are not low end. HSN is also a state college, so is Lawrence College in Murray and a lot of others. So what is it that they all face? They all face the same climate, they all have the same challenges. What do small children in rural Sindh and in Karachi, no matter where they come from, have? They have the same air to breathe, they have the same sun to brave, they have the same kind of heat strokes to recover from, and their schools go offline, they lose time, all of those things. But what I feel we need to do is to make high quality materials accessible to children across the board. We need to make high quality research available, and in Cambridge we've actually done that. What we've done is we've developed a small program. It's about 2.5 hours. You can take it as additional credit, or you can take it as a part of the curriculum. It's called Climate Quest, actually. So we launched it last year. It's free of charge. It is developed by the University of Cambridge's Project Zero, and it has been vetted by LUMs here who've reviewed to make it true to context. We've translated the case studies into Urdu, and we are happy to translate them into regional languages. So I think we've tried to make a contribution there. We are working with the government of Sindh. We are working with the Prime Minister's youth program, and we are working with anybody and everybody who would like to teach that content. So with the privilege of being here, if there's anyone from any state institutions or any other places where you'd like us to help you access that content, because it's world class. So that's one thing. When we come back to our own system, you can green the curriculum. We are also, by the way, working with ISESCO to green curriculums across the ISESCO countries. You can know what is bad, but then there is a missing link, which is action. So if we are apathetic about what's happening and unsure of what our role is in that, I think that's where the problem is. And I think to get that action, we need young people with us working. I think if there's one thing that will change, so in my role as the climate education ambassador, I was doing some sessions around COP. I was blown away by the kind of work that young people have done, 17, 18-year-olds across various countries. Then we did more sessions here, and each interaction with young children has been more humbling. So I think the one thing that will change and equalize it across is if we give those who are impacted the most a voice, and also give them the confidence and the encouragement. Trust me, they're far more energetic and they can do far more than all of us combined can.
Thank you so much, Uzma, for those reflections on education and how we can engage more the youth voice and young people. We're going to hear more about that in a moment from Fatima. But in the meantime, Ellen, may I ask you, Ellen is the Deputy Country Representative for the World Health Organization. She is here representing the Dr. Dapeng. The question is, could you speak about how is climate change expected to alter the burden of disease in Pakistan, particularly in terms of heat stress, vector-borne diseases, waterborne illnesses, and what can we do to mitigate this shift?
Thank you very much, Penile, for the question, and thank you to Dawn for the opportunity to be here. I will start by saying that we need to understand that climate-driven health impacts are all interrelated. They can affect the whole 2030 agenda. Because, for example, every acute watery diarrhea case that is triggered by floods is a child missing school, and also an adult or a breadwinner of the family missing work, and that may be the income to feed his or her family for that day. So we may look at it as a health issue, but it affects a multitude of systems as well as people's lives. Just to quote the World Economic Forum report, which was published in 2024, which warned that by 2050, climate change may cause an additional 14.5 million deaths and $12.5 trillion in economic losses worldwide. The World Health Organization also estimates that the direct damage costs to health are estimated at $2.4 billion per year by 2030. Just to give you an example, if we look only at the potential impact of malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress that is driven by climate change, the World Health Organization estimates that between 2030 and 2050, we would register 5 million additional deaths worldwide, and that translates to 250,000 per year. The good news is that we are still on time to do something that can avert these deaths. According to the World Risk Report 2024, Pakistan is among the top 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change and other overlapping crisis factors. For example, the rising global temperatures are increasing the risk of heat exhaustion, heat strokes, and cardiovascular diseases, particularly amongst vulnerable populations, if you consider children, the elderly, and also people who are working outdoor. Warmer temperatures, on the other hand, have also changing rain patterns are expanding mosquito habitats and increasing diseases like dengue and malaria. We have seen continuous surge of dengue in this country, even close to Islamabad in Rawalpindi. For instance, when we talk about malaria, in 2025, Pakistan reported 1.8 million malaria cases, as the country recovered from the country has not yet recovered from the surge that was triggered by the 2022 climate-driven floods. With raised cases from 400,000 in 2021, now we are talking about 2.7 million cases in 2023, which was the peak. So you can see that from 2021, we had 400,000 malaria confirmed cases. Come 2022, immediately after the floods, we had a surge to 2.7 million. And now we haven't still recovered to the basic of 400,000 in 2025. We are still reporting 1.8 million cases of malaria. Flooding episodes also contaminate water supplies that drives outbreaks for diarrheal diseases, and also other waterborne diseases, especially amongst children, which can also exacerbate severe acute malnutrition. The crucial question, number 2, is what can we do? What actions can we do to mitigate this climate change impact? First of all, we need to reduce the emissions that are by enhancing sanitation and also promoting sustainable energy. We also need to implement climate resilient policies such as urban tree cover, pool roofing, and also early warning systems. We also need to improve waste disposal. As the first speakers have talked about industrial waste, we also need to consider hospital waste by ensuring that hospitals have infrastructure that would be able to handle waste disposal efficiently and reduce the spread of infectious diseases. We need also to incorporate climate resilient designs in the healthcare infrastructure, such as solar-powered facilities and energy-efficient hospitals that can help decrease carbon footprint and also maintain essential services during extreme weather as well as natural disasters and power disruptions. We need to strengthen our surveillance system on climate-sensitive diseases and track vector-borne disease patterns so that we can be able to identify unusual trends and be able to respond as quickly as possible. And finally, based on the One Health approach, which is a powerful tool to sustainability, balance, and also to optimizing the health of people, animals, and the ecosystem, we need also to ensure that we are implementing this One Health approach. Over 75% of emerging and endemic human infectious diseases originate from animals, compounded by rising antimicrobial resistance and also climate-driven disease spillovers. Today, through the Pandemic Fund and in partnership with WHO, Pakistan is leading the way to address this challenge to be ready for the next pandemic. Finally, I would also like to underline that each one of us as individuals has a vital role and responsibility to protect our health by being informed and following simple recommendations such as wearing masks during pollution episodes, reducing our exposure to heat, preventing mosquito bites, ensuring that children do not miss their vaccination, or protecting our families by using safe and potable water. Even the smallest action can have a positive impact on our climate action, the 2030 agenda, as well as the 17 SDGs. This also includes many other indirect actions that have been discussed during this conference and can be game changers in improving public health. Climate change may be the biggest challenge of our times, but I'm convinced that if we take urgent action together, we will prevail and we will build a healthier future for us and for our children and our grandchildren. It is simply in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Some really stark facts, but also some positive progress and practical advice that all of us can be reminded of. Thank you again. Now we're going to turn to Fatima. Fatima Faraz is a climate activist, a youth advocate. Could you speak with us about how youth-led climate initiatives can be scaled in a way that ensures the inclusion of marginalized and underrepresented groups?
Thank you so much, Pernell. That is a great question, and I am sure that most of the Pakistani youth would want to listen to the answer for it. I would like to thank Dawn Media for giving me the opportunity, and I believe that I am the only 19-year-old at this conference. However, I wish that conferences like these should have been more youth inclusive, and each panel should have a young individual, because climate change is disproportionately impacting the younger individuals. And as Madam Sharmila also mentioned in her speech, that women and children specifically are being disproportionately impacted. If I speak about the youth-led initiatives, I would rather speak more from a youth perspective because all the experts have shared their views, and in this panel, I've got such wonderful experts who can talk more deeply and more towards the technical side. So I would rather share my perspective as a young individual hailing from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Community-owned youth-led projects, they can definitely be scaled and sustained. And I think that's where the real power lies. When a community takes ownership of an initiative, it ensures its long-term existence. So the first principle for youth is to find out and focus on the problems that your community faces and the solutions that your community requires and the solutions that they actually want. Because a strengthened, resilient community is itself the climate project. Sustaining the projects that are youth-led can happen through multiple ways. And the first and foremost, which I always emphasize on the most, is education, and specifically climate education. Because according to Drawdown organization, climate education is the third most impactful climate solution. Youth-led tutoring programs, girls' scholarships, and community learning circles are climate action. They just don't always get called that. Second, I would say, is healthcare. A healthy community, it spends less on hospital bills and is more capable of handling day-to-day challenges. Mobile health camps, mental health awareness, maternal care initiatives, all of this builds the human resilience that climate adaptation really depends on. After that, I would say waste management. Reducing a community's waste prevents urban flooding, it cuts diseases and reduces emissions on a very large scale. Youth-led cleanup drives, composting programs, and plastic-free campaigns are entry points that communities can see, touch, and sustain. After that, marginalized groups. Whenever we are talking about youth inclusion, I think it's really important to talk about the marginalized groups. They're always excluded when they can't afford to participate in conferences like the COP, because every year when COP happens in different countries, I see very less representation from Pakistan, very less representation of Pakistani youth, and most of it is because of lack of resources. So it's really important to give the youth the platform and the resources to speak on such platforms. Youth initiatives that can create green jobs, cooperatives, or skill training programs ensure inclusion. It isn't just a talking point. And lastly, I would like to talk about indigenous and local knowledge. So indigenous and local knowledge basically scales and doesn't copy paste. Centering the knowledge of our elders, indigenous communities, and local experts ensures solutions that are culturally rooted and actually work. So by this I mean that all the indigenous leaders, the indigenous elders, they should be involved in the decision making when it comes to climate change. And the whole point and the core idea of what I'm trying to say is that any work that helps people, animals, or ecosystems is inadvertently climate action. Youth don't need to wait for a climate project. They can start where they are, with what their community needs the most. And lastly, I, as a young individual from Pakistan, have a question from all my fellow speakers and from the audience as well, that until how long will we be participating in conferences and discussions like these? Until how long will we be just hearing to empty promises? Because honestly, these conversations just seem like empty promises to us young individuals. So we really want to see real action, and I'm really waiting for Pakistan, the Pakistani government, and the private sector to finally start taking action and not just speak and discuss these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fatima, for that poignant rally and observation. Indeed, young people do make up the largest share of this population, and your voices are extremely vital as we in tackling any social issue, particularly this one. So now we're going to turn to Famida. Famida Khan is the Deputy Country Representative for UN Women. So Famida, the question is, Pakistan has a climate change gender action plan. It also has a third NDC with gender mainstreaming commitments, and it also has around $565 billion in investment need for climate action. Yet women's and girls' participation in climate governance remains largely symbolic, as we heard youth as well a moment ago. So what will it actually take to move from policy into to power in practice? Over to you.
Thank you, Pranita. Thank you so very much. And it's always an honor to be among such a esteemed panel, I must say. And thanks to the Dawn Media for really gathering us. And above all, thanks to all of you who actually took time out for being here with us and listen to us. Sharmila, I mean, if you are here, such a champion with us, so we have a hope that at least things will change. On your question, Pranila, we are gathered here in a country that did not create that crisis, unfortunately or fortunately. The title of this entire conference, the Breathe Pakistan, yani Saans Lo Pakistan. What will happen if half of the Pakistan will not be able to breathe? And here I'm talking about women. That within that injustice, there is another injustice. And the women and girls, and primarily when I listened to what Fatma has been saying, I was thinking, okay, Fatma, although we are not 19, but at least we are at heart, we are 19 as well. The women of Pakistan and the girls of Pakistan carry the heaviest load of a fire that they did not light. Pakistan NDC 3 is a serious document. We have so many documents. We have so many policy papers. The question is not whether we have written the right words. The question is whether we have built the right systems to really include women and girls and the adolescent girls and the youth within that processes where we make all those documents together with them. And not only document with them, but also implement together with them. The architecture exists. The ambition is on the paper. What will it take? It will take a political power and a will to really engage women and girls at every step, no matter whether it's a PSDP, whether it's the ADP, whether it's a PC1. I haven't seen PC1, by the way, really being developed together with the people for which the PC1s are being made for. And I think that is a kind of a thing that we have to really start and we have to really think about. When it comes to the crisis, when it comes to the climate disasters in 2022, the flood came and the third of Pakistan was under its attack, right? And it was under its water. 650 women, pregnant women, had no access to health care. And it was not that the health care was even failed to deliver. It was because they were unable to find them. Evacuation, what will happen if the floods occur? Do the women really know that the early warning systems are there and they are the first one to receive that information? That is a question that needs to be asked. Who are the one? Think about elderly women, think about pregnant women, think about disabled women, think about people, those who are not there with the mobile phone, whether they will be able to get this information. A woman who does not have a national ID card, 10 million around, they are invisible to the state, they are invisible to the services. How can they get the services? In Pakistan, just to let the parliament today, Pakistan holds 17% of the seats, yet they drive nearly 49% of the legislative. With the 17% of the representation, they are driving 49% of the legislative agenda. Think about if we start engaging women and girls from the very onset, they can really drive this entire issue from a very different way. So what will it take? Three things. Pakistan has climate screening guidelines and for public investment. They must carry gender markers, not as a compliance markers, not as a tag only. I have seen public funding becoming surrender and getting diverted on one of the signature nodes. The thing is, how can we really see that those gender markers, which are meant for gender, which are meant for climate, they are really implementing the real thing that needs to be implemented in its true reality. Number two, the climate change gender action plan, it calls for women participation in climate governance. And I think, frankly speaking, if you ask me, we have enough of participation. We have to move from that. Pakistan, I have sat in enough consultations where we have women are aware in the rooms, they are on the agenda, they are on the table, but still they have no power to really let the people decide what needs to be done. They should be deciding for them. And I think that is the time where you have to really think that how women can really decide and the girls can really decide. They need mandates, they need budgets, they need accountability mechanisms that measures not whether women have attended or girls have attended or the youth have participated. The thing is whether their decisions were implemented or not, that we need to track now. Number three, the USD 550 million that we are talking about cannot be captured by large infrastructure alone. The women and the girls rebuilding their homes in Sindh, harvesting rainwater in Balochistan, walking 3 hours for clean water or clean cooking fuel in KP, they're the front line of climate adaptation. They're also the most cost-effective recipients of climate investment. The green budget tagging must track whether the money that has been allocated under the PSDP or the PC1s, have they reached the last mile? That is what we need to capture. I'll just end with one note here. The session title is Shared Unequal Burdens and the Shared Futures. The shared futures are not possible without shared powers. And a shared power begins with one thing this room can really do. Stop treating women inclusion or stop treating women and girls and youth inclusion as a favor and start treating that as a condition of survival, as a driver of change. With this, I thank.
Thank you, Famida. We can always count on you for clarity and a lot of passion. Thank you for bringing that perspective. Dr. Zeba A. Zattar is the country director for the Pakistan Population Council. We're going to move now to a question on demography. How do demographic factors, including the population density and urbanization, influence climate vulnerability? And also the adaptive capacity within Pakistan?
Thank you very much, Vanilla. Thank you, DawnNews, for holding yet another really successful conference on an important existentialist.
Just hold the mic a little closer to your mouth, that way. Yeah.
I was going to say thank you, DawnNews, and congratulations for holding a third very, very successful conference on important issues that tend to be neglected in the public space. I want to thank Ms. Sharmila Farooqi for raising really important issues. And if I may tweak my question a little bit and make it broader, I would like to bring up a couple of points. First of all, I think Ms. Sharmila and even in our inaugural address yesterday, we heard the fact that Pakistan is being, there is a lot of reference to international climate injustice. Pakistan is having to bear a lot of the burden of things that it didn't do. It's not at fault. We are not really living the kind of lifestyle that are actually emitting the gases that actually are affecting us. But I think the real problem goes further. It's within Pakistan. It's the very poorest and the most vulnerable areas that are going to be hardest hit and are already hardest hit by climate events, as we saw in the 2022 flood, and of course subsequent floods. And I think my point is going to be really about the fact, again, I refer to the chairperson's comments about using data. There are data that can really guide us to the actual population that are experiencing the greatest vulnerability. We released a report last year called District Vulnerability Index for Pakistan, where we combined 6 domains, which we think are extremely important, using Pakistani census data, Moza statistics, things that people don't really usually refer to really identify the, let's say it's between 20 to 30 million populations that are really living in the most vulnerable conditions. And I refer to 6 domains. I think communication, I think gender is at the center. Youth, of course, are, we mentioned them, but I think they're at the center. But I think it's the overall population of these districts that we identify. They are mainly in Balochistan, but they also happen to be in Sindh, in KP, and much less so, but 1 or 2 in Punjab. I think the domains we're talking about is connectivity and communication, which is extremely important. Geography mainly determines, where you're born, the chances you have for education, for livelihood, and the fact that you will even be able to migrate to an urban area. And I just quote one statistic, which is that a moza in Balochistan, on average, a person has to travel for 34 kilometers to reach a metal road, in contrast to, let's say, 5 kilometers in Punjab. So these are the kind of inequalities. When we move to education, a boy in Balochistan has to travel 3.5 times as longer as one on average to reach a secondary school. If I translate this into a girl reaching a secondary school, it would be much longer. And similarly, there are figures in our report about accessing healthcare. You asked me specifically about demography. Well, our demographic patterns, population behaviors are really following the same ethno-geographical development patterns that underlie these vulnerabilities. So we will find in these most vulnerable populations the most densely populated areas, but also those households that have the highest dependency ratios with high fertility, and also the districts with the most rapid population growth rate. I think our 5th domain is about livelihoods that are so very essential. I think this is where inequalities really manifest themselves, because those areas that are going to be hit by climate events are most likely to be areas where the populations are most dependent on agriculture, livestock, and any event that comes that really knocks them out of livelihood. And the last one, of course, is housing. I want to really kind of bring this together for a recommendation, because we can talk about inequalities, we know they exist, and we pair these inequalities with climate risk. We've developed a climate risk index. Then you cover something like, as I said, 16 million of the population, and if you relax the index to go up to a slightly more lenient level, then we're really talking about 39 districts in Pakistan covering about 25 million of the population. I think that tackling those inequalities is essential on grounds of justice. Justice, and I would call the leveling of the playing field in terms of development. Because unless you do that, I think we're going to be talking about those who are left behind. The next time there's a climate event, you can add another 5 million, another 10 million. But the first step that I recommend is that we have to correct our PSD, PC ones. They have to really point out that we have to ameliorate these inequalities, which don't give children, women, anyone living in those districts half a chance. And when they're washed off by a drought or a flood or drought, the whole population is gone. So I would strongly make that my recommendation. And I think that another, not only would that deal with reducing vulnerability of people, and particularly women and children who live there, but I think in those districts, but I think it would also reduce poverty. We've seen a sharp rise in current, the data that's just come out, the income expenditure survey, sharp rise in poverty. The sharp rises in poverty have happened exactly because of climate events have hit those vulnerable areas. So these are my recommendations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zeba. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the report that the Population Council has produced, it's excellent. And please do pick it up. So one message stands out clearly, I think, from this panel, and that is that climate action in Pakistan will only succeed if it is equitable by design. Our panelists today have reminded us that vulnerability is not accidental, often linked with many factors: gender, poverty, where one lives. That persons with disabilities, marginalized groups, women, girls, children, young people, communities living in both dense urban areas as well as those in rural communities are climate exposed and face higher risks, not because of climate change alone, but rather because of the systems and services were never built with them in mind. We've heard how education can either close gaps or deepen them, depending on whether climate literacy reaches every child, not just those in the elite institutions. We've also heard how climate change is reshaping health outcomes, threatening to increase heat stress, waterborne illnesses, vector-borne diseases, and more. We were challenged to move beyond the symbolic inclusion of youth and women, and instead focus on shifting real power, resources, and decision-making to those who are most affected. And we were also reminded that data matters, because without disaggregated data, population-led evidence, equity, it remains, and equality remains an aspiration rather than a priority. If we get equity right, climate action becomes more effective, more sustainable, and more just. And if we do not get it right, then inequalities will persist, they will likely deepen, and resilience will remain out of reach. So the takeaway is that climate change may not, the takeaway is that climate change may affect us all, but the injustice determines who pays the highest price. A climate action that is leaving people behind is not climate action at all. I'd like to thank warmly DawnNews for convening this important conference and for creating the space where difficult but necessary conversations can take place on climate justice. I'd also like to thank each of our esteemed panelists here today, my fellow women. You are all distinguished leaders. Your thoughtful insights and honest reflections have helped to elucidate not only the issues, but enlighten and create a clear and bold pathway forward on this vital issue. So thank you all very much, and thank you for being with us.
Very powerful messaging by the honorable ladies. I think that was very unfair to them, the applause they received. Can we have another one? With a special mention to the youngest speaker of our conference. And I think she's really put us to shame. We should have more 19-year-olds speaking with us in these places. Thank you again. Thank you, ladies. I'd like to now direct everyone's attention towards the screen. We have a video message from Professor Michael Stern from Harvard Law. Team, can you please play it?
This is Michael Stein of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability. Congratulations on this immensely important conference, and thank you ever so much for allowing me the opportunity to contribute a few thoughts about persons with disabilities and climate change. Persons with disabilities number some 1.3 billion around the globe, and 80% of people with disabilities live in the developing world. And so, much like other marginalized populations, people with disabilities have not benefited from industrialization or the economic benefits of colonialization, and instead have been burdened with the effects of colonialism and are now in a position where they are impacted by climate change and need to think about a response to it, and yet do not have the economic resources